Imagine a really high-profile courtroom. The defendant is just clearly guilty of embezzling millions, ruining countless lives, and, showing absolute contempt for the law.
Right, the worst kind of guy.
Yeah. And the judge looks down from the bench, pauses, and says, you know what? I have the authority to do whatever I want here. I forgive you. You are free to go. Case dismissed.
Wow.
Right? I mean, in a movie, if the defendant was some kind of lovable rogue, the audience might actually cheer for that.
Oh, for sure. We love that kind of stuff.
We do. We often view unmerited leniency as this great virtue. But when we transition from human courtrooms to the actual mechanics of the universe, a pretty chilling question comes up.
Which is?
Well, if God is the absolute sovereign over all creation, and he possesses infinite authority, why must he punish sin at all?
Yeah, that's the big one.
Why cannot the creator of the universe simply, I don't know, wave a hand, clear the ledger, and just suspend punishment for everyone? Welcome to reform thinking.
That scenario really strikes at the core of how we as human beings just completely misunderstand the divine nature.
How so?
Well, we constantly project our own localized human concepts of executive clemency onto the creator. I mean, a human governor can pardon a criminal because the governor is operating within a legal framework that exists entirely outside of himself.
Right. The law is just a construct we made up.
Spot on. It's a construct. But when we look at the mechanics of divine justice, we are looking at something completely different.
It's not just a set of rules on a piece of paper.
No, not at all. The concept of God simply waving a hand to dismiss sin, it basically unravels the structural integrity of reality itself.
That's a heavy claim.
It is. We are dealing with a theological landscape that requires absolute precision here. A single misplaced premise can collapse the entire structure of Orthodox Christian belief.
Well, precision is the mission for this deep dive. Today, we are analyzing some highly concentrated excerpts from a text by John Owen.
A dense text, I should add.
Oh, incredibly dense. It's called A Dissertation on Divine Justice. And in this, Owen is systematically dismantling the arguments of William Twisse.
Who was a very highly respected theologian in his own right.
Yeah, he was. And Twisse posited that God could, by his absolute sovereignty, just choose not to punish sin.
Right. Twisse argued that God punishing sin is a free act of his will, not some absolute necessity of his nature.
So to grasp the weight of this text, we really need to set the historical and theological stage here.
Yeah, let's do that. So John Owen is writing in the middle of the 17th century.
Right.
And he is widely considered one of the sharpest theological minds of his era. He writes in this scholastic method that basically leaves no logical stone unturned.
He covers every angle.
Every single one.
Yeah.
And the stakes here go way beyond just a spirited academic debate over coffee. Owen is building a fortress against theological shifts that were threatening the Orthodox understanding of the atonement.
Because if Twisse is right,
Yes, if Twisse's premise holds that God can choose to dispense with the punishment of sin without any payment, then the crucifixion of Jesus Christ becomes this totally arbitrary event.
it makes it seem like God just chose a really violent option for no reason.
Precisely. It renders Christ's satisfaction completely unnecessary.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to jump straight into the first major clash in the source material.
Let's do it.
Twisse builds this trap that sounds honestly incredibly logical on the surface.
It really does.
He uses an argument from the lesser to the greater. Twisse argues that if God can inflict a milder punishment than a specific sin deserves, it follows logically that he can suspend the punishment altogether.
It's a classic philosophical move.
Right, like if you have a dial that controls the severity of a penalty, and you can turn that dial down from a 10 to a 3, logic dictates you can turn that dial all the way down to 0.
It is a masterful use of human logic. Twisse is leaning on the observable fact that God does not always, obliterate sinners instantly.
Right, there's obviously grace and patience in the world.
Yeah, there are varying degrees of consequence. So Twisse assumes that because the execution of justice has variability, the necessity of justice itself must be variable.
But I want to push back on Owen's behalf here, because Twisse's logic assumes all systems work like a sliding scale.
Which they don't.
Right. Let us think about the laws of physics instead of a human courtroom.
Oh, I like that.
Think about aerodynamics and gravity. An airplane uses lift to counteract the immediate crushing effect of gravity. The pilot can manipulate how fast the plane descends, right?
Sure, they control the descent.
So the pilot is essentially lessening the immediate punishment of gravity. But does the pilot's ability to manipulate the descent mean the pilot has the authority to turn gravity off entirely?
No, of course not.
No. Gravity is an intrinsic reality of mass. You can alter how you interact with it, but you cannot suspend the law itself. Does Owen use a similar structural argument against Twisse?
That analogy tracks so well with Owen's methodology. Owen steps in and just dismantles Twisse's logic by introducing a massive twofold distinction.
Okay, break that down for us.
He says we have to look at how we view punishment. Owen says you cannot look at punishment as a single, flat concept. You have to categorize it in two distinct ways.
What's the first way?
The first view deals with absolute necessity. Owen explains that punishment, in its primary sense, is the mechanism by which God compels a disobedient creature back into order.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanics of that order. Why does a creature rebelling necessitate punishment rather than just like a stern warning?
It comes down to ontology, the study of being.
Good.
God is the supreme creator. He possesses natural dominion over everything he creates. So the creature owes its existence and its obedience entirely to God.
Makes sense. We are the clay, he is the potter.
Right. So when a creature sins, it is casting off its dependence on that supreme dominion. The creature is attempting to sever itself from the moral order of the universe.
It's essentially acting as its own God.
Yes. And because God is intrinsically holy and just, he cannot simply ignore this severing.
You can't just let it slide.
No, punishment is the mechanism that restores that order. It ensures that God's will is executed upon a creature that is actively unwilling to submit to it.
So the creature essentially says, I will not glorify you by my obedience. And God says, then you will glorify my justice by your punishment.
That is a great way to put it. The order is maintained either way. In this primary respect, Owen argues that punishment does not admit to being milder or having degrees.
It's not a dial.
No, it is a binary necessity of God's natural justice. The vindication of God's holiness must happen. It is an on and off switch. The order must be restored.
Because God's justice is an essential attribute of his nature.
Right, just like his omniscience or his omnipresence. He cannot choose to stop being just any more than he can choose to stop knowing everything.
Okay, but Twisse's observation still remains true.
Mm.
We do see different severities of punishment in reality.
We do.
So if the necessity is a binary switch, how does Owen account for the variability we see in the biblical text and in the world around us?
That leads right into Owen's second category, which deals with modes and degrees.
Okay, so this is where the variability comes in.
Yes. Owen clarifies that while the necessity of punishment is fixed by God's nature, the specific administration of that punishment, like the actual execution of it, falls under God's wisdom and will.
I see. So God assigns specific modes, degrees, and circumstances to punishment for the greater manifestation of his glory.
That is where God has liberty. He can choose the timing, the specific instrument of judgment, and the circumstantial severity.
So Twisse is confusing the nature of the thing with the administration of the thing.
That is the core error, yeah.
Owen is basically telling Twisse, yes, God exercises liberty over the degrees of punishment.
Right.
But that fact does not mean the fundamental nature of the punishment itself can be dispensed with. The necessity takes its rise from God's natural justice. You can change the mode, but you cannot eliminate the necessity.
And that is Owen's final checkmate on this particular argument. Twisse looked at God altering the circumstances of a penalty and falsely concluded God was altering the fundamental rule of the universe.
But Twisse does not concede easily.
No, he doesn't.
The text shows he comes back with another angle, another attempt to prove God can let sin slide without requiring a substitute.
He's persistent.
He brings up an argument based on symmetry. He states, God can reward beyond merit. Therefore, he can punish less than what is merited.
Ah, yes.
So if God can go above and beyond the baseline in a positive direction, giving unearned grace, he should be able to go below the baseline in the negative direction, offering unearned leniency.
What's fascinating here is that human logic loves symmetry. It just feels balanced to us.
Really does. If an equation balances on the right, we just assume it must mirror itself on the left.
Right. But Owen introduces a massive theological roadblock to this line of thinking. He points out the complete asymmetry between remunerating grace, which deals with rewards, and punitory justice, which deals with punishments.
So why are they asymmetrical? Because, I mean, in a human workplace, if a manager can hand out a surprise holiday bonus that no one actually earned, why can't that same manager just ignore it when an employee steals from the register?
Good question.
Both acts require the manager to ignore the strict baseline of what is earned. So why is God different?
Well, Owen relies on a theological rule of opposites to explain this. He cites a scholastic theologian named Maccovius.
Okay, what does Maccovius say?
The rule states that arguments from opposites do not always hold good in theology. Just because something operates a certain way in the positive does not mean the inverse is true in the negative.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Think about the nature of a creature before God. No creature can ever put God in its stead. Even if a human being lived a completely sinless life, that person is only doing what they were created to do in the first place.
Right, they haven't earned extra credit from the Creator.
No, because the creature already owes God everything.
You cannot earn a bonus by just paying your baseline rent.
Right. Therefore, any reward God gives is an act of pure grace. It depends entirely on God's good pleasure, his free will. He can give it to whomever he chooses in whatever amount he chooses.
So grace operates under the domain of God's absolute freedom.
Yes. But justice operates under a completely different relational rule. Divine justice necessarily operates toward its object to punish the sinner.
Because to do otherwise would be a denial of himself.
Yes. If God were to ignore sin, he would be denying his own holy nature. He would be saying that rebellion against his holiness does not matter.
Going back to the manager analogy, the manager handing out the holiday bonus is acting out of generosity with their own excess resource.
Right.
But the manager ignoring the theft is actually violating the legal and ethical framework of the company. The manager has the freedom to be generous, but the manager is bound by fiduciary duty to address the theft.
The asymmetry is absolute. Owen points out that Twisse is trying to bind God's justice to the exact same rules as God's grace.
Which doesn't work.
No. Owen reiterates that this entire line of reasoning from Twisse still only deals with the degrees of punishment. Owen never disputed that God has liberty in how he administers the circumstances.
He only disputes that God can ignore the fundamental necessity of punishment itself. I want to pause here for a second and look at the broader context of this debate, because Owen clearly respects Twisse.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The text mentions Owen calling him an illustrious man with many and great qualities.
So why is Owen dedicating so much so much intense intellectual energy to refuting a man he respects over what might seem like a scholastic technicality?
It's a fair question.
Why does this specific nuance matter to someone listening to this deep dive centuries later?
Because friendly fire in theology can hand the opponent the exact ammunition they need to destroy the entire system. Owen introduces this massive threat looming in the background. The Socinians.
Okay, who are they?
Specifically, he mentions a writer named Johannes Crellius, who authored a book called Of the True Religion. The Socinians were a highly rationalistic group gaining a lot of traction in Europe at the time.
What do they believe?
Well, they denied the Trinity, they denied the deity of Christ, and they vehemently denied penal substitutionary atonement.
Oh, wow. So they were watching this debate between Orthodox theologians and just taking notes.
Yes, they were hijacking the information. Let us trace the logic of the Socinians. They viewed God purely as a benevolent moral governor.
Okay.
They believed God's justice was just an effect of his free will, not an essential property of his nature. So when they read an Orthodox heavyweight like William Twisse conceding that God can dispense with the punishment of sin by his absolute sovereignty.
The Socinians took that concession and ran with it.
They did.
They took that first domino and flicked it. They argued, if Twisse is right, and God can dispense with punishment entirely by just choosing to do so, then God can offer a free pardon without demanding any satisfaction for the sin.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
if God can offer a free pardon without any satisfaction, the final domino falls, which is the cross itself.
Oh, I see.
If the Socinians are right, if God can just freely pardon humanity without his justice being satisfied, then the entire mechanism of Christ taking on the wrath of God is rendered strictly unnecessary.
It just becomes arbitrary.
Yes. Jesus' sacrifice becomes nothing more than a moral example, maybe a display of divine solidarity with human suffering, but definitely not a legal necessity to secure salvation.
That is a staggering realization.
It really is.
A seemingly minor academic concession about whether God's justice is an act of his will or a property of his nature can actually be weaponized to dismantle the entire framework of Orthodox Christianity.
Because Owen sees the Socinians using Twisse's words to build a system where the cross is pointless.
If justice can be waived, then the Father pouring out his wrath on the Son it's almost an act of cosmic cruelty rather than a necessary act of cosmic justice.
That's the exact danger. So Owen is writing to preserve the glory of divine justice and the strict necessity of Christ's satisfaction.
You can't let it slide.
He cannot let Twisse's logical leaps go unchallenged because the foundational understanding of the gospel is at stake here. He has to seal every crack in the theological foundation.
But the source text forces us to confront a structural problem.
Okay, what is it?
Well, anyone reading the historical accounts in the Old Testament might raise a massive objection here.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right. If punishment is absolutely necessary, if it is this rigid requirement of God's natural justice, how do we explain the biblical record?
The leniency we see.
Yeah. We constantly read about God holding back his wrath, delaying a sentence, or altering a penalty for the nation of Israel.
We do see that a lot.
So if Owen's rule is absolute, how does he account for God relenting without contradicting his own premise?
This is where Owen demonstrates incredible systematic thinking. He solves this apparent contradiction by explaining the covenantal structure of ancient Israel.
Okay, break that down.
He says, we must view God in two distinct roles or jurisdictions when he acts as an avenger of sin in the biblical text.
Two hats, essentially. Let us examine the first jurisdiction.
The first role is God acting as the legislator of the Jewish Republic. Owen actually cites the ancient historian Josephus here, noting that the political structure of Israel was a literal theocracy.
Right, God was their actual political king.
Yes. God was not just their spiritual deity, he was their civil king. He issued civil laws, dietary laws, and national penalties.
Okay.
And in this specific, localized role, God dispensed with temporary earthly punishments that were denounced in his threatenings. He acted like a civil magistrate.
So he could delay things.
Yeah, he altered the place, the degree, and the time of execution for these temporal penalties depending on the national posture of Israel.
Okay, that makes sense within the framework of a national covenant.
Yeah.
A human king can decide to delay a siege or lift an economic sanction based on the behavior of the vassal state.
Right.
But what is the second jurisdiction?
The second role is God acting as the supreme Lord and just judge of the universe. This is his cosmic jurisdiction over all moral creatures.
Okay, the bigger picture.
Yes. In this universal role, dealing with the violation of his eternal moral law, God does not dispense with the eternal punishment of sin. That punishment will absolutely be inflicted at the appointed time.
Either on the sinner or on a substitute. Here's where it gets really interesting. This totally dissolves the subtleties of Socinian writers like Crellius.
It completely takes the wind out of their sails.
Because you cannot take an example of God acting in his first role as a civil leader, delaying an earthly famine or a military defeat for Israel, and apply it to his second role.
Exactly. You can't apply it to God as the cosmic judge dealing with eternal justice. The categories are completely different.
The Socinians were confusing the geopolitical rules of a specific epoch with the universal laws of reality.
They were mixing up the jurisdictions.
Let me try an analogy here. Consider a modern judge who is also a parent.
Okay.
A parent might tell their teenager, if you break curfew, you are grounded for a month. That is a domestic temporary law meant to govern the household, right? Let us say the teenager breaks curfew, but shows genuine contrition, and the parent decides to waive the grounding. The parent has the authority to do that within the jurisdiction of the household.
Because it's a household rule.
Exactly. But if that same parent puts on their robe, goes to the federal courthouse, and presides over a trial for a capital offense, that judge cannot simply waive a life sentence because the defendant seems sorry. The universal judicial law requires satisfaction.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. God, as the civil leader of Israel, could waive a national grounding, but God, as the judge of the universe, cannot waive the requirements of eternal justice.
That captures the distinction perfectly, I think.
It does. Owen shuts down the Socinian argument by separating the two spheres of God's governance. He proves that temporary leniency in a civil theocracy does not negate the absolute necessity of eternal justice.
Amazing. Okay, we then encounter Twisse's fourth argument. And I have to say, when I read this section of the source text, I had to reread it to make sure I understood what Twisse was actually positing.
It's a bit shocking.
It is. Twisse argues, God is able to inflict any torture, even an infernal one, upon an innocent person without considering demerit.
Let that sink in.
And he concludes, therefore, he can suspend the greatest punishment despite the greatest demerit.
Yeah.
Wait. God can inflict infernal torture on an innocent person. That sounds completely contrary to the nature of a just God, How can a respected theologian even suggest that premise?
It is an alarming premise, and it requires a really careful dissection of the scholastic mindset of the time.
Okay, help me understand his thought process.
Twisse is trying to stretch the concept of God's absolute sovereignty to its absolute logical limit. He is suggesting that God is so transcendent, so unbound by any external rules, that he could theoretically inflict maximum suffering on an innocent being without doing anything wrong.
Just because he is the creator and owns the creature.
Right. Twisse thinks that if God has the sheer sovereign capability to do something that extreme without any prior sin to justify it.
Then surely he has the sovereign capability to withhold punishment when there actually is sin.
That's his logic, yeah.
I understand the logical structure he's attempting to build. If God can bypass justice in the negative direction by afflicting the innocent, he can bypass it in the positive direction by clearing the guilty.
Right.
But Owen does not let that premise stand, obviously. How does he attack it?
Owen attacks it right at the root. He focuses on a severe definitional error in Twisse's premise.
A definitional error.
Yes. Twisse is conflating two completely different concepts, torture and punishment.
Oh, I see.
Owen points out a rock-solid definitional truth. Inflicting infernal punishment on an innocent person is literally impossible. It is a contradiction in terms, like drawing a square circle.
Because punishment carries a specific forensic weight.
Spot on. Punishment, by its very definition, supposes a transgression. You cannot punish someone who has not broken a law.
Right.
You might be able to afflict them, you might cause them pain, you might subject them to what we would call torture, but you cannot punish them. Punishment is a specific, retributive response to guilt.
But human legal systems punish innocent people by mistake all the time.
They do.
Sometimes a corrupt system even punishes the innocent intentionally just to maintain social control or political dominance. Why could a sovereign God not do something similar?
Well, because human systems are flawed, finite reflections of justice. When a human court convicts an innocent person, it is a failure of the system's knowledge or integrity.
Okay.
But God's knowledge is perfect, and his integrity is absolute. For God to declare an innocent person guilty, he would have to lie, which violates his nature.
He can't lie.
Right. Owen is drawing a hard line in the philosophy of language and justice here. An innocent person can suffer affliction. Think of the biblical narrative of Job.
Yeah, Job suffered immensely.
But not as a punishment for a specific crime. It was a test. Job was not being punished in the forensic sense.
So the word punishment absolutely requires a preceding crime.
Yes. And following Owen's logic, we reach an inevitable conclusion that just destroys Twisse's argument.
Let's hear it.
If you cannot punish the innocent because punishment requires a transgression, then the inverse is also true.
Which is...
Not inflicting punishment upon a guilty person is also impossible.
Wow.
Why? Because transgression inherently requires punishment. The two concepts are locked together in the moral fabric of the universe. Sin demands punishment just as much as innocence rejects it.
It is a closed logical loop.
Completely closed.
Twisse tries to break the loop by using extreme hypothetical scenarios about torturing the innocent. And Owen essentially just points to the dictionary definition of divine justice.
He says you are mixing up your terms, William.
You cannot use an impossible hypothetical punishing the innocent to prove a theological point about sparing the guilty.
And that brings us to the final clause of Twisse's argument in this section. Twisse, perhaps realizing his logical constructs are failing him a bit here.
Yeah, he's running out of options.
He appeals to the disposition of God. He tries to claim that God is more willing to do good than to punish.
Which, again, sounds very appealing to modern ears.
Mm.
We want a deity whose primary disposition is benevolence, right? Someone who prefers doing good over enacting strict retribution.
It sounds super appealing. This raises an important question, though, about theological consistency within Twisse's own writings.
Oh, did he contradict himself?
Massively. Owen catches Twisse in a glaring contradiction here. Owen expresses genuine astonishment in the text.
What did Twisse say before?
Well, Owen points out that Twisse, in his other major theological works, had used very rigorous arguments to disallow any natural inclination of the deity toward the good of the creature.
Wait, so Twisse had previously argued that God is not naturally bent on making creatures happy?
Yes.
But when he needs to win this specific argument against Owen about dispensing with punishment, he suddenly argues that God is more willing to do good than punish.
Yeah. Twisse flipped his theological posture just to make a specific argument work.
That's a bad look.
It is. But Owen does not just point out the hypocrisy, he goes further and untacks the severe nuance of God's willingness.
Okay, how does he explain God's will?
He introduces a classic Reformed distinction regarding the will of God. He says we have to differentiate between God's perceptive will and his decretive will.
Let us parse those two categories, because those are big terms.
Sure. The perceptive will, which is the will that commands and exhorts, tells us what God approves of morally. God commands us to do good. He desires obedience.
He commands all people everywhere to repent.
Yes, that's right. In that sense, God approves of the good.
Okay, so what is the decretive will?
God's decretive will, his eternal decrees and the natural actions of his justice, operates differently. When a creature violates the moral law, God's natural justice mechanically requires a response.
It's triggered automatically.
Yes. God is not naturally inclined to bestow benefits, like a free pardon, upon a sinful creature in a way that opposes his justice without regard to Christ and his satisfaction.
So God's command for us to be good does not override his decree to punish evil.
Correct. Twisse is confusing God's general benevolence toward creation with God's specific natural requirement to punish transgression.
God's goodness does not cancel out his justice.
It can't.
So what does this all mean? When we pull all these threads together, we see a relentless consistency in John Owen's method.
Relentless is the perfect word.
Every single one of Owen's refutations points in the exact same direction. Think about it. Twisse tries to find a loophole in the absolute necessity of justice by using the variability of degrees of punishment.
And Owen closes that loophole by separating the nature of justice from its administration.
Right. Then Twisse tries to use the asymmetry of grace.
And Owen closes that by showing grace and justice operate on entirely different axes.
Then Twisse tries to use Old Testament examples of leniency.
Owen closes that by separating God's civil theocracy from his cosmic courtroom.
And finally, Twisse tries to use hypotheticals about innocent suffering.
Which Owen closes by enforcing the strict definition of punishment.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And by closing every single one of those logical loopholes, Owen forces the reader to look directly at the cross of Jesus Christ.
That is the whole point of his work.
If justice cannot be waived, if the penalty cannot just be dismissed by a sovereign decree without a payment, then the only way a sinful creature can be reconciled to a holy God is if that justice is satisfied by a substitute.
The absolute rigidity of the law highlights the sheer, unavoidable necessity of the atonement.
Christ had to die because God could not simply wave a hand.
Right. Understanding these rigorous distinctions is critical for anyone trying to grasp the mechanics of Orthodox theology.
It really is.
It guards you against adopting ideas that sound generous on the surface, like the Socinian idea of a God who just drops all punishments out of sheer love.
Which, again, sounds really nice to us.
It sounds nice, but this text demonstrates how that line of thinking completely undermines the reason for Christ's sacrifice.
It turns the crucifixion into a tragic, meaningless gesture, rather than the central cosmic necessity of human salvation.
It forces us to realize that divine justice is not an arbitrary set of rules that God invented and can just choose to ignore whenever he feels like it.
Justice is the very character of God in action against rebellion. It makes you view the concept of justice in a totally different light, which leaves a final thought for you to consider as we wrap this up.
Let's hear it.
If divine justice mechanically requires that every transgression receive its due, and human legal systems are meant, in some limited capacity, to reflect divine morality,
Yeah.
how should that shape our modern views on criminal justice?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Right. Do modern courtrooms lean too far toward the unmerited leniency that Twisse argued for, at the expense of the strict retributive justice Owen defends?
It's a debate we're having right now in society.
If rehabilitation entirely replaces retribution in human systems, do we lose the reflection of divine justice in society? It is a heavy question regarding the intersection of theology and civic law. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the original sources. We will catch you next time on Reformed Thinking.